Welcome back to the Coming Clean podcast. My name is Stephen Perkins. I'm your host, and today we're going to have a little bit of a deja vu moment because y'all remember Benji Backer. Benji Backer, at the time that we last talked with him on this show, he was actually talking with me. He was still president of ACC. Well, he's now a published author. He's now executive chairman of ACC. And he's about to be going out on a book tour for his new book, The Conservative Environmentalist Common Sense Solutions for a Sustainable Future. And I get to interview him for the show for this week. And so please enjoy this episode with Benji Backer.
Welcome to Coming Clean, the podcast dedicated to common sense environmental dialogue, environmental optimism, and real environmental solutions. This show is proudly powered by Orphaned.
Benji Backer, welcome back to the podcast that you started. How's it going?
Guess who's backer? Back again.
So last time we were together on this, you were interviewing me to take over the show during your sabbatical.
Yep.
And now I'm interviewing you because a lot of things have happened since last fall. And you're a published author now. You're going on a book tour. Give us the latest update for people who want to know what's going on in your life.
Well, it's been a really exciting few months, and it's great to be back on. It's really been fun to get back integrated into ACC slowly but surely from the board perspective, and just incredibly impressed with how the organization has succeeded beyond measure since taking kind of a step back. And yeah, I was off the grid for a few months, but I was also working on this book tour probably from the get-go pretty much. There's a lot that goes into a book tour, which I didn't realize, but I'm really excited to have released The Conservative Environmentalist, which is kind of the first mainstream, well, hopefully it's mainstream, that's the goal, book that a right-of-center person has written on the topic of climate change and the environment. Most books are written by left-of-center voices or a right-of-center voice saying that these issues don't matter and that we should just be drilling ourselves into eternity. We all know the types of people I'm talking about. And so both of those approaches obviously aren't helpful for a lot of Americans that want to know what a common sense agenda on environmentalism looks like. And as I'm sure you've run into and a lot of the ACC team runs into, it's hard to point people towards a resource that is comprehensive from like a literary or book perspective. We've got our academy, we've got one-pagers, we've got great partners that do great policy work, but there's not anything like this out there. And so for the last few months, I've been working on A, what the message is going to be, B, where I'm going to be going and how the tour is going to look, and C, how to maximize this moment. We're in a really important presidential election year. The narrative is still not where we want it to be. And it's hurting our environment, it's hurting our economy, it's hurting our lives that we haven't been able to move forward in a productive way. And I think this is one of those key pieces to the puzzle of making sure that ACC's movement is successful long term.
And the point that you make about it being a first of its kind book is important, and also from an author's perspective, I imagine daunting. What was your process like when you started to first outline the book and what you wanted to touch on? Because there's so many. I mean, this could have easily been probably a 1,000-page book if you had everything you wanted in there. But how did you think about what's the most important information to lay out? And I guess with that, kind of give people an idea of what kind of topics you do broach in the book.
Yeah, and the first part of that question, I mean, it's the unfortunate reality of this topic is that it actually is very complicated and it's very nuanced, and that's why there could be a 1,000+ page book. And I've been preparing for these interviews post book launch of like, what are your top 3 solutions that we should be doing on climate change right now? And the reality is there are so many things we need to be doing. There's so many different actions we need to take. There's so many problems with the current narrative that it would really take probably a multiple series of a book series to actually make this comprehensive. But hopefully this is just the first step in that. And that did make it really hard in terms of what to prioritize. The book kind of lays out how I thought about it. Was actually I decided to write the book at the top of a mountain in Norway I have ADHD, so writing a book was never on my radar. Sitting down and writing is not something that I've ever enjoyed, but it's something where I was able to clear my head before writing this book and kind of outline it in the way that it ended up turning out, which is a overview of how we got to where we are in this country on the issue. So were we always this divided on the issue? Why aren't conservatives at the table? Why is the left turned so crazy? Uh, why do conservatives deny climate change? Those sorts of like things in the first chapter. Then kind of debunking the current environmental approach. What's wrong with the Green New Deal? What's wrong with relying on government solely for these answers? What actually is kind of backwards that people don't know? And then kind of the last part of the book, which is the vast majority of the book, is talking about solutions. But going back to my point earlier, there's a lot of solutions, so it was hard to narrow it down. But I tried to focus on kind of the breadth of the topic. So I talk about energy, and I talk about our need for every energy source to be part of the equation. I talk about wind, solar. I talk about geothermal. I talk about oil and gas, and of course, I talk about nuclear. I talk about conservation as part of the solution, sustainable agriculture, forest management, restoring ecosystems. And I also talk about the role of the government. What role do communities play? What role does the private sector play? What role do entrepreneurs play? And all in all, the goal of the book is to chart a third path with those sorts of solutions being discussed between alarmism versus denial. A third path that is one that creates human flourishing, that creates our economy being able to flourish, and a path that creates an environment that's able to flourish. Those are the three principles that we need to keep in mind when we're looking at climate and environmental policy. And I outline that in the book, and I try to cover as much as I can as one book can.
Now, I imagine you over the years of doing ACC and even still now, you're traveling a lot. You're meeting a lot of people. You're hearing different perspectives. Sometimes you end up in places where I think like why, how, all that kind of stuff. I
Sometimes I
imagine.
wonder that same thing.
Yeah, I tell us about how those travels and those meetings and the people who you've learned from, how that influenced what
Oh,
went into the book.
it was the biggest part. I mean, the 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 main one of the main things I want to get across in this conversation is that this book is not the Benji approach to climate action. This is the collective approach from all of the amazing stakeholders that we work with, and what they've proposed and what they're showing, and really representing the communities and the companies and the nonprofits and all the people who are working in a productive way. And I've been super blessed to go see so much of this firsthand, so many of the solutions firsthand. And I think back to that 60-day road trip I did in an electric vehicle in 2020. And while that was a horrendous trip from a bandwidth perspective and kind of keeping myself sane perspective, I learned so much, and I drew so many parallels to stories from that trip because I visited 36 different states, rural communities, conservative communities. I saw the urban-rural divide in real life, which is really contributing to our divide on environmental issues. Urban priorities aren't being represented by rural communities. Rural community priorities aren't being represented by urban communities. All of the different stakeholders that I've met with over the years and the communities that I've gone to and the activists that I've worked with and had the pleasure of working with, all of that is baked into the book. And it is the most important part of it. And it influenced everything. But it also, I think, gives more credence and credibility to this perspective because it's not just theory, right? This isn't just a theory of how we could solve environmental challenges. This is the reality of how we could solve environmental challenges. It's not me doing it. It's all the people who are featured in the book and so many more that I wasn't able to feature that are doing it. And, we can talk about the Green New Deal or these kind of like policy principle talking points, but that's not actual reality. The reality is what's going on in real America. And there's so many cool stories that I share and showcase about basically giving them as examples of how to move forward.
Hey, talk about the members, the ACC members that you've met with throughout that time and how they impacted the story. I'm again, as we think about the how monumental the book is, the fact that it's the conservative environmentalist.
Mhm.
Um, that movement would not be here. That movement would not be a thing without ACC, without the work that we've done there, without the members. And
Yep.
so, how do you think that our membership and people who are aligned with our mission and values have changed the narrative, which was our early mission, to the point that we now have this book and we now have this third way, this third approach to environmentalism?
Yeah, I mean, it really is playing on the original goal of ACC, which you and Danny and so many people on the team were instrumental in getting off the ground so long ago. We still are trying to change the narrative, and that was our first slogan, but we're still trying to do that because with the narrative changing towards this third path that's outlined in the book comes the policy. Like if the narrative is alarmism versus denial, we're either going to get alarmism, denial, or nothing, and that's kind of where we're at right now. So the narrative is so important, and ACC's movement is the only movement that's really trying to change that part of it. Like we have so many great partners: ClearPath, Press, C3 Solutions, Audubon, TNC, so many great groups. All the policies and amazing ideas that they propose won't matter if we continue being stuck in this harsh divide as a country on the issue. And until it's normalized that we have this approach, and with our 40,000 activists across the country, that's the only way to do it. This is just a piece of that puzzle and hopefully can add as fuel to what our activists are doing. But this movement, this book, is nothing without the people. And you think about whether it was the civil rights movement or gay marriage or any of the kind of landmark changes in recent American history, it didn't happen because there were good policy ideas. Of course, that helped. But those policy ideas happened because of real life people who were pushing for it, and it became the norm to push for those things. This book and ACC's movement and the culmination of 7+ years of building this with so many amazing people is what will create that change. And it will not just be because of the good policies that I outline in the book. It's the messengers, it's the the evangelists of this incredible movement that we have, and truly wouldn't be able to do it without those.
Yeah, it's sort of the classic thing of a lot of I think we see a lot of DC based groups and think tanks and stuff. They think like our ideas are so great, and it's like yeah, but no one outside the Beltway is talking
Right.
about what you're talking about, and so we've been able to help bring that into the rest of America, which is really
Well, yeah, and,
powerful.
and I've heard from so many of the people who have read the book so far. A lot of the friends and family that have been able to kind of peruse it and give me their feedback, and like so many people who are very educated, very aware of what's going on, not knowing a lot of the realities around solar and wind, around nuclear, around the trade-offs of all of those, around the role that forests and farms and ranchers and people don't really understand because the narrative hasn't been there, the realities behind a lot of these issues. And ACC's been trying to change that for so long, but it's a long process. And that's why I talk about this in the book. This is not some immediate, like, get everything done overnight sort of thing. In terms of growing our movement or finding the solutions, it's going to take time because it is difficult. And we don't have all the solutions. We don't have all the technologies that we're going to deploy over the next few decades. A lot of those are still to be invented by the next generation of entrepreneurs. And we don't have all the answers. No one does. And we also don't have the narrative yet. So there's a lot of work to be done, but it's going to take a lot of patience and a lot of dedication. And if anything, from ACC's past 7 years, I think our slow yet rapid growth, not trying to overhaul the entire system, but really trying to do steady progress, has really, I think, ended up making a huge difference.
Yeah, incrementalism is not always sexy, but it's how these things
No,
happen, right? I mean, to use your example of earlier, the civil rights movement, right? Like that didn't just happen in the '60s, and all of a sudden, the landmark
right. There's
legislation,
a
all that
tipping
was
point.
passed. That happened decades, and you could even argue, 100+ years earlier. And so it takes a while to start. Um, Talking a little bit more, I always like asking, whether it's business owners or authors or whatever, just going through the process of actually writing the book. And most of it, again, talk about not sexy. It's like it's not very fun to just
No.
sit down and write a book. But is there anything that surprised you throughout the process, or any sort of revelations that you had as you were putting this together?
I think I had an amazing team kind of helping me compile my thoughts because as you know, firsthand, my thoughts can be pretty scatterbrained. And trying to consolidate that was really difficult. All these kind of solutions and stories and examples, and I think one of the most eye-opening parts was just the breadth of what is out there in terms of solutions. Like, it is truly endless. There are some really cool ideas from every stretch of the country, every stretch of the economic, part of the United States, like every sector of the economy. There's just so much going on that it's almost inspiring to know that while we're trying to like debate these like very tribalistic one-liners as a country, that in communities there are literally millions of examples of sustainability and climate action at work. So I think that was the most inspiring part because every time that I looked for something to put in the book, I found like 15 more things to put in the book. And so it just was like really hard to corral everything. But I also would say like and I'm not going to talk too long about this because it's not necessary, but the book writing and promotion process is a full-time job. Like, I don't know, unless you're like Barack Obama or like LeBron James or some really famous figure, it is so much work because you're trying to perfect it, especially since this is the first of its kind, trying to make it the best product that it can be and the best kind of showcase of how you feel. But also, like, I don't have the name ID. Most people who write books that do well don't have the name ID to like just be able to let it all happen organically. So you're kind of in charge of your own book tour and speaking engagements and who gets books to promote them and so many different kind of variables that I never thought about doing. And so it was a very fulfilling process that uncovered a lot of solutions, like I was just mentioning, but it also uncovered how uh, being an author is its own full-time job. And I was kind of treating it like it was going to be this kind of side thing, which definitely was not the case.
Yeah. Um, you would need a bigger team behind you. I might also recommend, if you really want to sell out, like, just start saying controversial stuff, start saying really divisive
That would
stuff.
be really the
Yeah,
easy way to go.
I think that's how you do it nowadays. So
You
you
don't
could
even
take
need a
that or
team at
leave
that
that.
point. You just capture all the attention. Honestly,
It's just
that
you
is.
would.
I'm glad you brought that up because as much as it's like funny to reference, it is so true that like the publishing process, people recommend that you be more divisive, that you be more outlandish
Yeah.
because that will get more attention. You don't have to put as much work. Um, it is less work to be crazier. So I can see why people fall into that trap. Uh, and I hope that I continue to kind of have people around me to make sure that sticking on messages is crucial because our our country deserves better than these kind of easy outs that these political leaders are taking just to get attention. It's definitely easier, but it doesn't really do anything. At least anything
It's
positive.
easier to build notoriety. It's harder work to go through with your therapist, though. So there's sort of that trade
I
off.
don't. I think they
You
could
know,
use a therapist. A lot of these people.
that's true. Yeah, maybe the issue is that they don't have one. Um, So, talking about how to put these principles, these values, these ideas into action. Obviously, at ACC, we have the climate commitment that we've launched. That's sort of our platform, and six big ideas to help solve climate change. How do you see the connection between what you discuss in the book, the climate commitment, and how we actually get these things into action? I think you alluded to some of it a little bit, but your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the climate commitment is kind of the central framework of the book. And in fact, the last six chapters are around the six principles, kind of focusing on each one in their own right. It's not exactly framed that way, but it is about as close as it could get for a book. So the climate commitment is absolutely a central theme. And I would say like the framework of the climate commitment is important because it's a thought process. It's kind of like a filter. It's a approach that can then guide people to the solutions that work for them, that work for their communities, and then you can get a lot deeper. I think that's what the Green New Deal probably should have intended to do if it was done right. And I'm really proud of like the climate commitment for doing that, but with way better principles and actually some depth to it. I think what it looks like in action is, let's get some easy wins under our belt working across the aisle. Like, I think that that's the first step, because this issue didn't used to be so partisan. And of course, you can debate the solutions, but then eventually you come out of the room and you say, okay, we debated, this is what we decided. There are some really easy wins that ACC has been pushing for that I also talk about in the book. Permitting reform, getting government out of the way of accelerating, clean energy projects. There's no way to accelerate clean energy without reducing government regulation. Plugging orphaned wells that have leaking methane. So there's natural gas wells that have been abandoned and there's leaking methane. 70% of the methane in our atmosphere comes from natural gas. You could limit that significantly by just plugging up these abandoned wells. Like, these are some really easy, and I say easy like our politics isn't broken, but like very bipartisan, nonpartisan approaches. Now, they aren't the landmark, sweeping overhauls that people think of when they think of environmental action, but I think that those sorts of wins could get us on the way to bigger steps that we could take together. It's kind of like a walk, then jog, then run perspective. And just like you should warm up before you do a workout, we should probably like start getting our feet wet in some of these policies and warm up a little bit. And that's where I think the climate commitment does a really good job, is it has this short-term approach, but it also has the long-term opportunities in mind as well. And if we could get some short-term wins under our belt, I think we'd be off to the races.
It's a good reminder to warm up before the workout, because I hurt my knee the other day, so I'm writing that one down. That's nice. Getting old,
You've
man.
been getting pretty swole, so don't let your lack of warm-ups hurt you. You gotta do it.
I'm trying to break out of just the face for podcasting to maybe do more.
Right, you
Anyways,
got. We've always said you've got the face for podcasting.
exactly. I have one more question, and then I want to go into some rapid fire questions
Sweet.
that we've been doing at the end of these. And the final question is just, I want to end on what makes you the most optimistic about the future of the conservative environmental movement, based on what you've seen with ACC the past 7 years, the book, and the tour that you're about to embark on, and by the time this is out that you're on. What makes you the most optimistic?
I think that we're right. This approach is right. It's the only way. There's the two narratives that have been so pervasive in this conversation have not worked. And this approach of innovation, of growing our economy, of having reliable and affordable and scalable clean energy, of leaning on entrepreneurship and ingenuity rather than the government. This is the only way that we can actually fight for a sustainable future. And protecting our planet is not just about protecting our planet. It's about protecting our people. It's about protecting our heritage. It's about protecting our neighborhoods, our cultures, our economies, our national security, so many different things. And neither approach has worked. So we're right. This is right. So someday, hopefully very soon, history will start looking back on this movement that we've created and said, this was the movement that actually got us to where we needed to be on the environment, and returned us back to sanity, returned us back to solutions, and returned us back to a place where we didn't need to worry about environmental challenges in this country again. I truly believe that this is the only movement that can do that. And if this book, if ACC, if our entire movement, our ecosystem are successful, then everything will be successful in the world that we care about in terms of our environment and our economy and so much more. So this is everything, and there's big implications. There's a lot of work to do. It's not going to be easy, but I'm super optimistic because I know that we're right.
I think that's the big quote for the episode. We're right. It's good.
And if you don't believe
all right,
it, let's prove it to you.
So true, and we will.
We gotta let
some
us.
some rapid fire stuff. We heard what you're optimistic about. What are you, not related necessarily to this, although it could be. What are you most excited about, just in general in life right now?
I'm getting really good at pickleball, and I think that that's my new sport. But in a more serious sense, I feel like there's this awakening of America towards getting out of our silos and getting out of our um, kind of tribal boxes. And I'm seeing some of the most divisive voices start to talk about the importance of kind of thinking outside the typical bubbles that we're in. So that makes me super optimistic, but and excited about what's going on in the world, even though the narrative maybe hasn't caught up yet, and the fact that I'm playing pickleball.
Great. I've heard that there's now a third tennis-like sport from Brazil that's come onto the scene. So I can't keep up with uh, all the
Racket
different
sports are
tennis
taking over
things.
the world. Sorry.
I guess so. God help us. So you obviously have a book coming out, and we've been talking about that. But is there a book that you have read, either a classic book that you always recommend, or something recently that you really enjoyed that you would recommend to the audience?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many. I've actually started reading again for the first time in a while because I was always like pushing it off and pushing it off. And um, there's there's a bunch of books that I've read recently, but the one that I like the most that's going to help me a lot on this book tour and that I think could really be useful for most people in their lives. And I'm looking over at my bookshelf because I was going to butcher the name. Is How to Win Friends and Influence People. Um, that book paired with some of the books I've read about kind of prioritizing what to say yes and no to in the workplace have been really helpful because if you are working in a mission-based job, your work is your life. And not because you're working so much. I mean, you could be, but you could be working 30, 40, 50 hours a week and it could still be your life because that's what you're passionate about. And if you want to be successful in it, you have to know how to influence the people around you in a positive way, in an uplifting way, but also know how to prioritize your time. And I've been reading a lot of kind of books to help me with that.
A classic book. I love it. You're now in Arizona, although with how much you regularly travel, how much you're about to be traveling, your state of residency doesn't really matter, frankly. But tell us about your favorite place in nature. And this is a question I've stolen from you because you've asked new hires of ACC this question. But what's your answer to that?
My favorite place in nature has to be the Cascade Mountains in Washington or Lake Minocqua, where I grew up going to in northern Wisconsin. Two very different places, but the peacefulness and the quietness of a lake and the Cascade Mountains separately are just, have special feelings in it. I can think about those places, it automatically calms me down. So it must be special.
Brilliant. And then a final thing that we've started doing on this show, because it is called Coming Clean. And so, in a way, there needs to be that has like a dramatic angle to it in a sense. Do you have any sort of climate rant that you want to give to the world? So, for some background, Danny and I did an episode where we talk about like what's up with all these soup throwers? Why do I have to keep buying new things to be environmentally friendly? What's your big gripe, environmental gripe at the moment that you want to put out there?
Mm, biggest environmental gripe. I would say probably putting solar panels in cloudy places. I
Mm,
just don't
yeah.
like, just intuitively, it doesn't make any sense. It's like putting a cloud panel in a sunny place,
Well, and, yeah,
a panel that
and
absorbs clouds,
we all
or
know
it's
what a
trying to get,
cloud panel
it's
is.
putting a
Yeah.
dehumidifier in a place that is 0% humidity.
Right.
We are really stupid, or putting a hydropower plant in the middle of the desert. Like, let's start thinking about things before we do them.
Yeah.
And if it's cloudy, then solar power doesn't make much sense. And when you fly into Seattle and you see solar panels on people's roofs, it's like, well, congrats, you're powering 5%, maybe less, of the
Just
time.
makes them feel good.
Yep.
Incredible. Well, cool. Tell us, because when this episode comes out, the book will be out. Tell us how they can find you and learn about the book tour.
Well, I'll be having everything on my website, benjibacker.com, with tour dates and everything. I'm going to be going across the country for the rest of the year talking about this. So if I'm not in your area for the first few months, might be in your area later. The book can be found on every major book-selling website out there and probably in your bookstore locally at some point. So it's called The Conservative Environmentalist and can be found on Amazon, Target, etc. And I also can be found on social media at Benji Backer, where I'll be posting happenings from the book tour and more incredible solutions that I'm seeing across the country, and hopefully trying to guide this movement towards the success that we all know it can be. So social media, benjibacker.com, and the book is on every platform possible.
Benji, it's good to have you back. Thanks so much for coming on.
Great to be back. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks so much to Benji for coming on the show. And we do encourage you all to go out and pick up a copy of his book, maybe even find one of his book tour locations and go see him, go say hello. Until next time, thank you so much for tuning in. You can, of course, subscribe and rate our show anywhere that you get your podcast. And we'll talk with you on the next episode.
And before we jump, the Coming Clean podcast is grateful to be powered by Ørsted, a wonderful company strengthening America's energy security with reliable and domestic clean energy. Through its integrated renewable energy solutions, Ørsted is creating American jobs, investing in American communities, and driving American innovation, all while preserving our country's natural habitats. A clean energy future truly connects us all, and Ørsted is helping lead the charge. To learn more, visit us.orsted.com.